UCSF's head of medicine says that's a false choice. Dr. Bob Wachter will join us to discuss why you should do both and share the alarming new CDC numbers on kids with no underlying conditions getting sick from COVID. Also, a senior policy advisor to former President Obama will be the keynote speaker at the Professional Businesswomen's Conference coming up in San Francisco. Cecilia Munoz will share what inspires her and what every woman can do to empower herself. But first, a lopsided victory in the runoff special election for State Assembly District 17. That's the seat representing nearly half of San Francisco. Supervisor Matt Haney scored a huge victory over former supervisor and veteran of city political scene David Campos. So Supervisor and soon-to-be Assemblyman Matt Haney joins us now to discuss his win and his vision for the future. Congratulations, future Assemblyman Haney. You led the primary, but it was, almost a tie percentage-wise. It was close. But this time, it was 63% of the vote. I think we can call that a landslide. Are you surprised?
Well, I'm grateful. I was obviously hoping to win, but it's great to win by that margin. We have a very diverse city with a lot of different views on politics, even in San Francisco. And we were able to win in nearly every precinct and in every neighborhood and every supervisor district. So that's a really powerful mandate that I get to now take with me to Sacramento. And I feel grateful for the support and ready to get to work.
You did put together quite a coalition. As you said, you won in just about every pocket. So it's hard to pinpoint one thing, but you did get an important endorsement from YIMBY Action. And some people say that gave you a huge boost. What do you think this suggests about how San Franciscans now think of building housing?
We ran on a platform of building more housing, and we were unapologetic about it. I think that we tapped into something that is right there for anyone who lives in this city, which is that the rent is way too high, housing is unaffordable, and it's impacting all of us. And San Franciscans want to see us build more housing. They believe we have a housing shortage. They want housing of all types. They want affordable housing. They want housing that working people can afford. And they want their leaders to prioritize that. And they've seen situations like the project in my district on Stevenson Street, 500 units of housing for working families that the Board of Supervisors said no to. So we ran on a message that I was going to go up to Sacramento and say yes to housing. And it was something that the voters responded to, and I think was definitely a big part of our victory.
All right, besides housing, what are some of the other issues that will be front and center for you as you take your work to Sacramento?
Homelessness is a big one. We frankly need every city and county to have a plan and accountability to do their part on homelessness. That means building housing. It also means mental health treatment, the care courts that the governor is talking about, shelters. I'm also going to focus on drug addiction and the fentanyl epidemic. We are still seeing nearly 2 people die in our city from drug overdoses. We need more leadership from the state. We need to stop this flood of this deadly drug into our communities, and that's going to take state leadership and law enforcement and a real statewide plan to get folks into treatment. Climate change, we are continuing to see the devastating impacts of this existential threat of climate change in wildfires and air quality. And so we're going to need to see a lot more aggressive leadership to get us to net zero emissions. So those are some of the big issues that I'm going to take on. San Francisco goes up there and has a big responsibility to be bold, to move the needle. And I believe I now have the mandate, I hope, to go up and do that and to deliver for our city.
No doubt you're excited for your new opportunities, but I do wonder, though, you've represented the Tenderloin for quite some time, and there's a lot of work left undone, so to speak, right? You mentioned some of the issues like drugs, fentanyl, crime, homelessness. Talk about what you hope will happen in the neighborhood, and I guess who might carry on the work?
Well, there's still a lot of work to do here for sure, and we have made some progress. When we declared the state of emergency, something I was very supportive of, we were able to bring additional police into the neighborhood, community safety ambassadors on every corner, much more aggressive approach to helping get people into shelter and housing and cleaning the streets. But we have a lot more work to do, without a doubt. And I will continue to be a big partner with the mayor and whoever comes in and succeeds me as District 6 supervisor And also for me, as someone who lives in the Tenderloin and has represented this area, this is not something we can do alone. Neighborhoods like the Tenderloin are used often as a dumping ground for people who've been failed in other neighborhoods, other cities and counties. So I'm going to bring a message to Sacramento that we need statewide plans. We need every city and county to build housing, to provide for people who are experiencing homelessness. And you can't just give people a bus ticket and say, go to the Tenderloin, because we can't help everyone here. So yes, we need to solve some of the problems here, but we also need bigger solutions than what can be done in one neighborhood.
All right. Who do you hope Mayor Breed will appoint to fill your seat? If you can't give us a name, is there a type of person or the type of experience?
Well, in this case, I can give you a name.
Okay, do it.
My chief of staff, who also happens to be the chair of the San Francisco Democratic Party, Haney has been with me in this role, but also is the founder of the Transgender Cultural District, would be the first trans supervisor in San Francisco, but even beyond that, and the first drag queen, but even beyond that, is just a brilliant, capable leader who has been on the trenches on these important issues of housing, homelessness, and I would just do an incredible job. So I'm hoping that the mayor chooses Haney. Would be a proud thing to get her into that seat for our city, but also I know she plans to run either way.
All right. Look, you will serve out the remainder of David Chu's term, of course. He's now city attorney. That ends this year, so you actually have to run twice more this year. Can't get too comfortable. First in a June primary and then in the November general to keep that seat for a full term. So, look, what can you really deliver between now and, let's say, November, all right, in the general, so that people send you back?
Well, I'm going to go up there in the middle of the budget process. It's actually fairly late into the session, so I won't be able to introduce bills this year, but I will be able to deliver on some big wins for our city to bring home additional resources and housing and supportive services, make sure that we move forward bills that will allow us to build more housing here in San Francisco and around the state. I'm really interested in some of the bills that can aggressively build affordable and social housing and make sure those get over the finish line. So I plan to hit the ground running when I get to Sacramento and make sure with the months left I have in this term can deliver some concrete results and build on that for future years.
All right, Assemblyman-to-be Haney and Supervisor Haney, thank you so very much for talking with us today, fresh from your victory last night. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Coming up next, we'll tackle the mask mandate battle. UCSF's Dr. Bob Wachter will be joining us to talk more about that. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us. You don't want to miss Dr. Wachter in our conversation coming up. But right now, enjoy this beautiful view that our director has selected just for you of San Francisco. Decide whether it deems a mask mandate for airplanes and transit is still a public health necessity. The Justice Department says if the CDC deems it necessary, it will appeal Monday's Florida federal judge ruling that ended the nation's mask mandate for air travel and public transportation. Joining us with the latest on this battle, the anxiety it's causing a lot of people, and the latest COVID news, UCSF's chair of the Department of Medicine, Dr. Bob Wachter. Dr. Wachter, great to have you on again. Thanks so much.
Kristen, my pleasure.
All right, so what should the CDC do? What do you hope they will do at this point?
It's a little bit of a hard call. I mean, I hope they appeal it if the lawyers in the Justice Department and CDC come to believe that this is setting a precedent that says that the federal authorities don't have the ability to enact a mandate at a time of a public health emergency. That would be unbelievably dangerous for the next variant, for the next pandemic. The CDC and federal health authorities need to be able to mandate certain things. They may decide it's not worth the fuss, that they were going to take down the mandate anyway in a week or two, and this doesn't set a precedent at all. So we really need the lawyers to kind of figure that one out. But it would be a really, really dangerous precedent if that's what this means.
All right. And as we're speaking, breaking news, it's like they heard you, Dr. Wachter. The CDC has decided to ask the Justice Department to appeal that ruling. So we'll see what happens. But I would imagine if it got reinstated, let's say they win the appeal, how hard is it to get people to put their masks back on planes and trains now after they've not done it for like a few weeks?
Yeah, I'm guessing that even if they won it, they would leave the mandate off. I really do think they pushed things back 2 weeks. Last week they pushed it back to May 3rd. They were going to take a good hard look at May 3rd. And the reason they pushed it back was asking the question, are we in the beginning of a pretty big, nasty surge? And it really doesn't look that way. It looks like we are seeing an increase in cases, but we're not seeing hospitals fill up. So my guess is they were going to take the mandate away anyway. So I really think they're probably doing this mostly to push back on the possible precedent.
Okay. So there's the question of should we have a mandate, right? And it sounds like a lot of the medical community says maybe not at this point, although that could change. And then there's the question of should we opt to mask, right? So let me give you some scenarios, and you just tell me real quickly what you think, for your typical person. Although I don't even know what a typical person is, but packed plane.
So what is the scenario?
Would you mask? Let's say you, all right, in this scenario, packed plane.
Okay. Packed plane.
Yes.
Any plane. The only plane I would not mask on is empty plane. If I'm the only person on it, then I wouldn't. Otherwise, I think that given the amount of COVID that's around, there's a pretty good chance that somebody on the plane, maybe somebody sitting next to me, has COVID. The ventilation system is good, but to me, it's not a big deal to mask, and I'd rather stay safe. So I'm wearing a mask. I'll take it off for 30 seconds at a time to gobble down some food or chug a drink and then put it right back on. So, and I'm going to wear a good mask. I'm going to wear an N95 or equivalent.
All right. I assume it's the same answer for trains and buses. How about school classroom?
I think in a city like San Francisco where the case rates are low, I think it's good to leave the choice to the parents. I could see parents choosing not to put a mask on. I think if it was my kid, I probably would have my kid still mask. If the kid was fully vaccinated and I was confident that everybody in the class was fully vaccinated, then I think it's a closer call. But I would tend toward masking as long as the case rates are reasonably high as they are now. But I'm glad that they took away the mandate. I think that at this point it can be an individual choice.
Okay. What about waiting for your food to come at a somewhat busy restaurant, maybe half full?
Well, I'm okay eating in an indoor restaurant in San Francisco now. I did last night. And I was with a group of 5 colleagues. They all were from UCSF, so I was completely confident they were all vaccinated. And I did not wear a mask while I was waiting for my food to come. We came into the restaurant and took our masks off, and we sat there and enjoyed the meal, and I felt okay with that. Now, is it impossible that I will get symptomatic and have COVID tomorrow? No, but I would have felt like that was a reasonable choice given the facts on the ground today.
All right. Look, some doctors say, look, masks are unnecessary because we have vaccines, and vaccines are much more effective at preventing COVID. What do you say to that, to present it like that as a choice?
I think that's a false choice. I think that There's nothing about getting vaccines that would prevent you from wearing a mask. I think I take myself as a reasonably typical person who's pretty aware of the risk. I've gotten my vaccines and 2 boosters. I'm much safer than I would be if I hadn't, but my risk of getting COVID has been diminished, but it's certainly not diminished anywhere near zero. It's a fair amount of COVID around, not as much as it was in January, but still a fair amount of COVID around. And if I wear a good mask, there's no question that I've enhanced my protection. And so to me, this is an and rather than an or. I do think if you're fully vaccinated and boosted, the idea of going out to a restaurant or doing something where you have to take the mask off, it's reasonable to keep the mask off. I think having friends over your house, it's fine to have your mask off in that setting. But to frame this as one or the other just doesn't feel right to me. There's just no good reason not to use both if you're in a risky setting.
All right. Alexis has a question for you. Our viewer says, how can people tell if they have seasonal virus hay fever from COVID?
Testing. Unfortunately, there's really no way to tell. The symptoms of COVID are so, myriad. There's so many things it could be that I guess the thing I would say is, and I have allergies too, and there's some days I'll wake up and be congested and be stuffed. If the first time that happens, you should do a rapid test and be sure it's negative. The second time it happens, you should do a rapid test and be sure it's negative. If it's the third day in a row or it keeps happening, at some point, after 2 or 3 times they're negative, I think it's fine to say, all right, that's my allergies. And now I will test if I have a symptom that's different than my usual. I would just call that a usual symptom. But the first time it happens, there's absolutely no way of being sure it's COVID versus your seasonal allergies. And I think that's a perfectly good use of a home test.
All right. Hey, you can still get if you haven't gotten your second batch of 4 free tests from the Biden administration, get those and use the test when you're uncertain. We just learned that there's a high school in San Mateo County, after averaging about 2 to 3 cases per week for almost 3 months now after the Omicron peak, spiked to 115 cases in the past week and a half after holding a prom. Look, when you look at that, do you think that warrants any new action or not in terms of what the school should do or activities they should hold?
Well, that's really concerning. I think we all want the schools to stay open, but that's an awful lot of COVID around. And to me, it would merit taking a really good look at what we're doing in the classroom. It may be a time to have the kids wear masks for a while until that little mini epidemic has passed. Clearly, they had a super spreader event of one kind or another, and there's going to be a period of risk for a few weeks where all of those cases not only go through, but the kids that might have spread it to other kids. So the classroom there has become a riskier place than it would have been and was a month ago. And so I think it's reasonable to do some testing, and I think it's reasonable to at least let parents know and encourage people to wear masks. And it might be, I know how politically hard this is, but that would be a place, and if it was my kid's school, I'd probably want to mandate for a week or two until you were clear that you were past the hump there.
Yeah, I believe they are doing that. So they're doing the right thing on that. Dr. Wachter, we only have a minute left, but I want to touch on some new CDC numbers because I know the vaccination rate is pretty low for kids 5 to 11, and this kind of speaks to that. It seems like that it really makes a difference in terms of a kid's outcome if they were vaxxed, right? Can you tell us about those numbers?
No question about it. Yeah, some new numbers show that the vaccines are working incredibly well in every age, but including the kids. And to me, it's not even a close call whether the benefits of the vaccines outweigh the very, very, very small risk. The risk that people worry about is of cardiac involvement or pericardial involvement. It's very rare. It almost never has landed a kid in the hospital. And there have been a fair number of kids who got very sick, and I'm still worried about long COVID in kids and what the ultimate consequences of their infection are. People say to me, I'm worried about the long-term effects of vaccines. I'm many, many times more worried about the long-term effects of COVID. So to me, it's not a close call.
All right, Dr. Bob Wachter, always great talking with you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Coming up next, the Professional Businesswomen of California Conference is coming up soon. We'll talk to one of this year's keynote speakers up next. All right, everybody, be right back with a fantastic interview, so stick around.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
ABC7 is a proud media sponsor of the Professional Businesswomen of California Conference. This year's event is coming up in 3 weeks. And joining us now is Cecilia Munoz, one of the keynote speakers, and she is former director, White House Domestic Policy Council under President Obama. Cecilia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we look forward to having you in San Francisco, or at least speaking virtually at the conference. Like this year, it is virtual, but it's happening May 10th and 11th. Always a great time, always so much learning and networking. Share the importance of supporting women and why it's important for you to speak to this community, and the message that you're going to give. I know the keynote speakers are always great, so what is your address going to be about?
Well, I'm very excited to be part of the conference this year. It's important to support women because we're half of the population. And so this is as much about us developing our skills and our networks, as well as helping others to develop theirs and move forward. The theme of the conference this year is Rise. And so I'm going to be talking about ways that we can help ourselves to rise and move forward, but very importantly, ways that we can help others to rise around us. This is an important event because we're half the population, and the stronger we are, the stronger the country and the world are.
Indeed, Rise is a perfectly appropriate theme, and you have certainly done so, risen as the first Latina to lead the White House Domestic Policy Council. Talk about what it was like helping shape domestic policy and how being a woman brought something to that role.
Well, I was the first Hispanic person ever in that role. It is one of the most challenging things I've ever done. I spent 8 years at the senior level in the Obama White House, and it was extraordinarily exciting, extraordinarily challenging. I ended up writing a book about the experience of really frequently being the only Hispanic person in the room, of what it's like for people who are first or who are the only one in a position like that. Because sometimes you have doubts, sometimes you have fears. I learned a lot about bringing empathy to the job and how important that is in being successful in making policy, being successful in doing right by your colleagues and for the country.
Can you give us an anecdote or a story in which you took your background and made that a strength where it could have been a weakness or perceived by others as such?
Yeah, I talk about this a lot, especially if you're the only person like you in the room or the first person like you in a position. You're sort of called upon to bring that kind of expertise. And it can be scary because sometimes you're explaining things that the rest of the people in the room don't understand, and it may be information that they don't want to have. And so part of the reason that it was important to me to write about this experience was that I wanted to convey to other women, to other people of color, that whatever room you're in, they need what you bring. They need that experience. There's all kinds of evidence to show that having a diverse group of people making decisions means better decisions, means better impact. And so it's important that those of us who bring a different perspective take confidence in the fact that the rest of the people we are with really need what we bring.
As women of color, too, I think sometimes we can be a little more prone to imposter syndrome. Can you talk about how you dealt with that and how we can overcome that?
It's so common. We really nearly all go through it. I recount an experience where a very high-level official actually told some journalists that he suggested that I might not be qualified for my job, that I was an affirmative action hire, and that cost me a lot of confidence. And so I described some of the strategies that I use and that other women use to deal with those doubts, right? Being ultra prepared, making sure that we're asking for feedback, making sure that we're so prepared whenever we walk into a room that we won't make a mistake, because our mistakes feel like they're not just our mistakes. It feels like if we trip up it's everybody like us tripping up. And so we don't feel like we have the space to do that. And we prepare.
It shouldn't be like that, but it still is. And we certainly saw the preparation reflected recently at Ketanji Brown Jackson's confirmation hearings, right? It's like, give them no room. There's nothing they can say. Yeah, your memoir, More Than Ready, Be Strong and Be You. So many lessons in there for women on the rise. So hopefully folks will check it out. And then PBWC, it's May 10th and 11th, right? And I think besides you, I know there are a lot of other great speakers, and people can get tickets at pbwc.com. Leave us with one final thought.
That building your skills and putting yourself out there is not just good for you, it's good for the country. We really need everyone to be leaders now, and pbwc.org is where you can get some resources to help you do that. Yes,
that's why we're such a proud media sponsor. There's just such great opportunities for women for learning and fellowship. Thank you so much, Cecilia Munoz. A pleasure talking with you.
Thanks so much for having me.
We'll be right back. All right, thanks everybody for watching. Enjoy this lovely outside shot before the rain comes back. Thank you so much for joining us today on this interactive show, Getting Answers. We'll be here every weekday at 3 on air and on live stream answering your questions. World News Tonight with David Muir is next.